Welcome, everybody. Today we're talking about Math Made Manageable, proven techniques to boost your child's confidence and skills in math. I'm your host, Ann Dolan, and for 26 years, my team and I, including Pete, have been helping kids with math. I would say it's more complicated these days than ever before, and kids are expressing the same thing. In a recent survey done by Youth Truth, 90,000 students were surveyed, and 57% consider it important to learn math. And just 46% of students said they actually feel comfortable asking questions in their math class, asking for help when they don't understand something. So that's not a good sign. And we'd love to resolve that with you here today. So I have one of my favorite experts on the topic, Pete Pecoraro, here to shed some light on this important topic. Good afternoon, Pete.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you for having me. Those comments in the chat were so illustrative, I think, of like what we're about to talk about. So that struck me right away as to like what some of the common themes are, and I hope we can address all of that.
Yeah, me too, especially the ones about feeling lost, overwhelmed, anxious. Absolutely. So before we get started, let me share with all of you a little bit about Pete's background. He is a math expert here with Educational Connections, and he also understands the outcomes of math in that he preps kids for the SAT and ACT, those high stakes tests. He's a former high school teacher. He has a teaching degree from University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And a fun fact, Pete was his high school valedictorian. So Pete, I'm just curious why you think math is so hard for so many kids.
I think there are a lot of reasons. First of all, a lot of people feel like it's dry to begin with. So there's that. It doesn't kind of like pack the same wallop as like literature, where there's action and plot and and fighting and romance and all of that. Math is, it's different. It's drier than that. But I think the biggest thing of all that strikes me is that it's how foundational it is in nature. In that one set of skills and techniques in one class directly builds upon and feeds into the next class, into the next class. So if ever there's a gap or a deficit or frustration or something you didn't pick it up in an earlier math class, it's only going to be amplified when you get down when you carry on into the next class. More than any other discipline, math has this. So that's a big thing for, I think, that makes it hard for students. I think another thing too is just the sheer number of solving steps that can go into a math problem. Even a medium level question can involve 6 or 7 steps. So you have to be methodical and disciplined about that. And if you get one thing wrong, even if it's little, some minuscule thing on the sixth step, and you get the wrong answer, it's like you did most of it right, but then that leads to that feeling of being defeated. Like some of the parents were talking about the stress, the anxiety. Um, it only takes like one little misstep, and then people feel it's like, well, why should I even try? It's like that's not the way to look at it, but human nature, that's part of it. I think the other thing that's kind of like a more modern aspect that's making math hard, or why it feels hard, is the pandemic itself, the aftermath of COVID, where I think there is some cognitive and operate basic basic operational loss, never learned, or was learned in a fragmented or fractured way, and now you're trying to take a class like pre-calc, where it goes back to the foundation. You didn't get the foundation, or only partially. These are some of the reasons why I think math is hard for kids, or they see it as hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd also add to that we work with a lot of students with ADHD, and math requires, kind of to your point, Pete, lots of steps and so much working memory. And working memory isn't your short term, or it's not your long term. It's like your ability to juggle multiple things in your head at one time. And that's really hard for kids with ADHD. And math and also written language require a ton of working memory. And so we can see why kids don't like math, or they're avoidant of math, or feel anxious about math, because it is inherently harder for them. So Pete,
Absolutely.
let's talk a little bit about the trends that you're seeing as well.
I think what the biggest thing that I notice is a very heavy reliance on technology. Um, the calculator is kind of like now it's like a given, like you just get it. It's like it's there. It's that's the go-to tool. So some of the kind of the things that I think would be kind of like more um, effective, like the old school like times tables, flashcards, working with chips and money and things like that, worksheets. Um, that is kind of like there's been a diminution of that and a heavy reliance on the on technology, the calculator in particular. Just to take an example, even the SAT, which is kind of like the I feel like it's kind of like one of the hallmarks or the bastions of kind of like scholarly academic presentation. Even they got rid of their non-calculator section just a year or two ago, and now it's a calculator is available anytime, all the time. Even on a test like that, I think they've kind of conceded to that. So then I think that just leads to like a decay in the like being able to do things kind of like automatically rote. You should be able to do 40 times 40 without a calculator, hopefully, but we automatically reach for the calculator. That's what I see students doing all the time. So there's a calculator is a great tool, but there's a role for it, but not to the exclusion of all of the other tools that you hopefully would have in your repertoire.
And it also feels like it's just part of everything kids do because, so much is not in a book anymore and not with pencil and paper, but
Right,
instead, it's with these online math programs that, as you always say, they have the calculator baked in. And so
right.
instead of trying to kind of solve part of it on your own or to think, well, I think the answer is about this. So you have a sense of what you're looking for, kids just kind of automatically go to an easy way to solve the problem.
Right, exactly. We look for the easy solution, the instant gratification way of getting it. Even on kind of like what we're showing here on this slide, those numbers are pretty basic. A one half, a one and a half, and then there's a calculator right there. I mean, it's inside the application. So that's that leads to kind of like a fragmentation of the skills that you'll need, especially on the higher maths.
Yeah. And it's certainly not the kids' fault. Like a lot of this
Right.
has just kind of developed with time. And so have the applications that kids use through AI. Can you talk a little bit about the role AI has, especially in advanced math, and what
Yeah,
the impact is on homework?
absolutely. I mean, I think this like the calculator is one thing, but this is kind of like an extension, like on it's almost on steroids, where it's taking it to the next level, where all one has to do is take a picture of the problem, even a sophisticated word problem a or a pretty complex polynomial or expanded operation problem, and the application shows you all of the solving steps and the answer and all of the workout that led into it. So there's that. I mean, the tool, the most popular ones are Photo Math and Mathway, which we're showing. There are others, but they do all the work for you. They're doing all of the work for you. So think of the temptation to just say, well, I'll just do that. I'll just do that, and then obviously you're not really learning the solving steps.
Yeah, and I know parents call our office and they're looking for help for their kids, and they'll often say, "I think my child has bad study habits." And definitely sometimes that's it because they do okay on the homework, they do might do okay on like a project, but then when it comes to the test, they're completely lost. And
Right,
sometimes it is because they're not studying correctly. Sometimes it is they're relying too much on AI in their
right.
work, but it doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. There's certainly a good way to use it. When you're working with kids, how do you help them use AI?
Absolutely. I have, I'm a realist. I come at this like this is the world we live in. It's 2024. So technology abounds. We all have it. What I encourage students to do is like uh, use the tool to check your work, do the work to the best of your ability, and then use an app to to check it. That's a great feeling when you do it yourself and say, wow, the app is matching what I did. That's that's a good use of technology, where it's more of a verification, and the tool might show you that there was a slightly more efficient way of doing it. You got the right answer, which is fantastic. That's what we want. But you might learn, it's like, oh wow, I didn't think of that. There, I could have done that in 3 steps instead of five. Those are that's a good use of technology. I'd say put the calculator away as much as you can, but if you want to use it as a double check, I use it as a double check sometimes. That's that I think that's an effective way to to weave technology into some more kind of like old school techniques.
Yeah, I agree. I know when we started, one parent in particular said, my child's really, really lost with word problems. I'm wondering if you can touch on that a little bit and why these can be really hard for kids.
Absolutely. There's a few things going on here. I mean, it was so interesting that that comment popped up, and I thought, wow, that's where things are at. The Students struggle with word problems because you're not given the math. Like if I give you, like the straight up problem, a lot of kids can kind of like cope with that. But if you have to tease the problem out of a paragraph, that's what makes it tough because there's two things going on there. Verbal comprehension. You have to be able to read lines, read text, and then turn. We're going to talk about this, and then turn words into math that you're reading from the verbal, and then do the math and get the right answer. That's a lot. That's a lot. And my personal feeling is that this is not something that's like emphasized a great deal in the classroom. Instead, what happens, I think, more often in the classroom is here's 60 square roots, work them out. You're not, I to me, I feel like that's you're doing one problem 60 times. I feel like that's very different. So the ACT and SAT, which I deal with most of my time, is there are numerous word problems. There are numerous story problems in those tests. So then the challenge becomes, taking the language and turning it into math. So and that is it's a complex skill that's way different than kind of like a rote learning recitation type of thing. So the
Yeah.
frustration, it is understandable.
And I know we're going to get to that in just a moment, talking about word problems, but it sounds like, at the end of the day, there's just a disconnect. Because oftentimes our kids are really smart, they can think at a higher level, they have the ability, but their performance and their ability isn't quite in line. And so we're seeing more of a disconnect than ever before. Also talking about the homework is okay, but the test grades aren't. So we also see a disconnect there. So
Mhm.
let's talk a little bit, Pete, about ways to help struggling kids, because that's why we're here today.
Yeah.
Um, so when we think of, what to do for kids, certainly at the parents' end, we can totally stay calm. What we don't want to say is like, it's okay, honey, I was bad at math too. Our whole family's bad at math. Like, it runs in the family.
Runs in the family.
We don't want to say that because it's kind of saying to the student, there's nothing I can do about it. I'm genetically wired to be bad at math, but we know that it can be learned for sure. So we want to stay calm and certainly be positive, and know that for some kids, that the way in which the math problem is being explained in class may not be the way they're going to be able to learn it. And they need it explained in a different way. And then they need repetition and practice around that. We've also found that math is the one subject that kids cannot teach themselves. So, I know as parents, sometimes we'll say, like, just try harder, sit at the front of the room, pay attention, focus more. But none of those things, they can maybe apply to other subjects, but they don't apply to math because, as you mentioned, Pete, it's cumulative in nature. And if you have gaps here, it's incredibly difficult to go back and teach yourself something. Um, and so really getting help, especially one-to-one help, so that somebody can explain it to you in a different way is key. I'm certainly asking the teacher if you're understanding it the way the teacher is doing it, but maybe you just need more time on that, getting a tutor. All these things can help. So
Totally agree.
yeah. So when we think of other strategies, Pete, that you use, tell us a little bit about that issue you mentioned with word problems. And you said that's super common, kids that can do the rote math but can't do the word problems. What's one way to help them?
Yeah, there are several ways. I think the first thing is to kind of adopt the idea that math is a language. Math is a language, just like Spanish and French and foreign language are languages. Math is its language. There are words that will help you to take kind of like that the word problem and get it into something that you understand and that you can process. Addition, when they refer to a difference, what's the difference between the price paid? That's a subtraction idea. I always tell students like per. That seems like such an insignificant word, three little letters, PER. Do you realize that that stands for division? We're talking about division. 12 roses for $30 or 30, 12, $1 per rose. You can some of these little word choices are operational in nature. Is stands for the equal sign. Draw an equal sign, write it down. The word of almost automatically implies multiplication right there. A lot of students are surprised when I tell them that. Did you know that of means multiplication almost all of the time? Per means division. As soon as you see per, make a fraction. Draw a bar, and we're going to have something on top of the, and we're going to have something on bottom because it's a fraction. So if you adopt the language of math, it doesn't solve all of your problems, but it's a great place to start.
It sure is. And so is, I know you love this, Widwick. Tell us what
Widwick.
Widwick is.
I come up with my own acronyms. Widwick, write down what you know. Look at that paragraph. There's a lot going on there about Diego and his car. We don't need to get into like the granular level of it, but um, off to the side there, if you take notes out of the problem, that's you're write down what you know. The purchase price, PP, the down payment, that multiplication problem at the bottom. It start what the power of this, it helps you unlock the problem um, eh, to get you off to a good start. Does that guarantee that you're going to get it right? Not necessarily, but it enhance the probability, the likelihood that you're going to be able to unlock the problem, understand it, and have a better chance of getting it right? Absolutely. Most of us can't do math from a paragraph. That's um, but if you adopt the practice of write down what you know, what I call Widwick, translate those words into something workable, math that you can understand. Take note. It's like you're taking notes on the problem. Take notes out of that paragraph, and you have a much better chance of understanding the problem and getting it right.
I like that, especially for anxious kids or kids that are quick to they have low frustration tolerance. Like, I don't know this. You're like Widwick, write down what you
Right.
know. And it's amazing. Like once they start to write down something, all of a sudden they have this
Right.
newfound confidence.
Absolutely. Writing down something, just getting started it's amazing how much that helps you feel better about what you're doing. And I think all of school, to me, in math especially, is you got to feel good about yourself
Mhm.
when you're doing these things. If you can start to get one or two things down on a sheet of paper, I think your world opens a little bit more, and you're going to feel better about it. And that is the key to just about any human endeavor.
That is true. That is true, Pete. I know you work with a lot of kids that come to you and they just feel like math is so beyond them.
Right.
They're frustrated, they're upset, they're anxious, their grade isn't really reflecting what they could do.
Right.
In addition to Widwick and making math a language, you also believe that math is really a visual language too, and that students can make it visual. How do you help them with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I encourage students almost, I wouldn't say every problem, but the dominant trend is so many problems are lend themselves to a visual presentation. That's my MMV, make math visual. Again, this is an ACT problem that we're looking at. That looks pretty complicated about the elements of A, B, C, and D, and what do they have in common? What do they not have in common? It's so much easier to turn it into a picture. Many problems are like that. The ACT and SAT are big time on this. They'll say so and so is building a garden, redesigning their apartment in the shape of a rectangle. Why wouldn't you draw a rectangle? That's a great place to start, and start giving yourself a picture, a visual aid, so that you can see what's going on. Here, I drew the circles B and D to kind of help us understand that all of the elements of A that are part of B, a smaller circle inside the bigger circle, and then and kind of like stitch it out from there. Um, it's many of us are visual learners. This kind of goes back to the idea of like there are many different ways to learn. Some people are it's auditory or written or visual. A big part of math, especially geometry, is visual in nature. So give yourself a picture. Start to try in that direction, and once you see it, you have a better chance of getting it right.
Yes, that is for sure, Pete. And sometimes kids think, this is so dumb. Why do I have to know this? I'm never going to use this in real life.
Yeah.
And to help
Right.
them see the purpose behind math, I know you're a big believer that, anytime you can apply it to how this works in the real world, it's definitely a motivating factor for kids. How do you do that?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the big things I think we can all relate to is anything that has anything to do with money. Is there's almost always a mathematical component to that. It might be you're shopping for something and it's hey, and you're in Kohl's, it's 30% off. It's 30% off. Well, I help students think, well, think about it this way. You could do that, but 30% off means it's 70% on. So turning real world situations like that, anything that has to do with money, building to construction, figuring out the distance from one point to another, is could be a Pythagorean theorem type question. Um, Even little lessons in astronomy. You can build triangles about like, where the positions of stars are, and it's like and use Pythagorean theorem to figure out the distance from the sun to a different star in a galaxy. Any of these things tend to make it more real, and so I try to kind of like bring that into to my teaching as often as possible. And when you see kind of like the real world situation, it makes it more um, realistic.
Yeah. I like this picture too because it kind of speaks to the fact of working with young kids in the kitchen,
Yeah,
teenagers too. But one thing that's so hard for kids in elementary school is understanding the relationship between fractions, decimals, and percents. And they don't really quite get that fraction as part of a whole. And so teaching them through cooking, measuring can be really
right.
powerful too. Um,
Coins,
yes, coin,
rulers,
money.
anything like that, measuring sticks.
Mhm.
We used to do more of that. I mean, I think there's less of that now due to the the presence of technology. But any of those kind of like old things, looking like the hash marks on a ruler, um, coins themselves. Um, there are definitely way you don't think that that math is kind of like ingrained to your life, but you'd be surprised once you start paying attention to it, how much is really there. So
Yeah, I agree with you. And I also know that guided practice is really important and that it's one thing we kind of forget about with kids is like, okay, I taught you this, therefore now you know it. So the next day, we're going to go on to something else, which is usually how American math classes go. We learn
yeah,
something on Monday, we practice it. Tuesday, I'm going to introduce a new thing. And then on Wednesday, it's another new thing. But kids really need guided practice. They don't always get that in a classroom. How does it work?
for sure. I think you touched upon this earlier, but I think math is the one subject you said you can't really teach yourself. Um, I totally agree with that, and I would even amplify upon that. I think it's one of those subjects where you need a mentor. You need a mentor when I'm working with students in my practice. I feel like we're a team. Let's get we'll be together on this and work problems together so that you can see you always have kind of like uh, a guide. I'm not going to let you I'm not going to let you fall. We're going to do things together. That's guided practice. And I think that to talk about to a point that you mentioned earlier, it's like, well, the teacher is the mentor, right? Well, but sometimes you need it's just if it's a different voice, it could be that could be the guide, whoever could be a tutor, could be the older brother mentor or dad, Sometimes just having that different voice, but it's something that we're invested in it together. That's what guided practice is all about. And then in my world, you go solo. You go solo for a little while and you try and take what we've done as a team and apply it independently and see if you can get the right answers. But
Well,
not until we work it out as a team. We're on it together. Math is about practice. Math is about doing. Math is about repetition. We grossly underestimate how much you have to do of it to get really proficient at it. So all of that kind of like feeds into the practice, 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 practice.
yeah, I agree with you there, Pete. So if your child is struggling with math, can you talk a little bit about things to look out for?
Definitely, if the stress level in your house is going up and it centers around a math assignment, I mean, that's a pretty strong indication. I think some of the kind of like the verbal things that we say, it's like, I'm not good at this. I don't like the teacher. I hate math. I've never been good at it. Then some of the more obvious things, like there's missing assignments in the grade book, um, avoidance of the math, or avoidance of doing the work. It's like, I'll get to it later. It's like, and do we get to it later? Maybe yes, maybe no. But placing the blame on others, negative self-talk to me is a big one. Is like when you start talking negative about yourself, it's like, I'm no good at this. I'm never going to be good at it. I'm never going to use it. Those articulations are, almost always indicate, that this is something you got to get on. And with math, you got to get on it early, for as early as you can to mitigate because of it's cumulative or graduates in nature. The earlier you can kind of like notice these phenomena, the better off you're going to be. It's going to be much harder to deal with it if it's later on. So we have to listen and we have to look to what kids are saying and what they're doing. And if you hear these things, then hope that's when the red flags hopefully will go up and say, okay, we've got to do something about it.
Yeah, I agree. And we have to believe them too. Because sometimes I think
Yeah,
as a parent, it's easy to negate it. Like, you're not bad at this, you're good at this. Or, oh, you can learn it. Just listen harder
right,
in class tomorrow.
right,
But believe
right.
them when kids say, this is hard for me. I don't get this. Um, what's the reason behind this? Because those things in their mind are true for sure.
Right. It's their world. It's true in their world. And that's kind of all you need to know, especially when the negativity and stress and kind of frustration is on display.
Yeah, for sure. So if we can be of help to you and your student, we are happy to assist. We offer one-to-one math tutoring. All our work is virtual. We use a tool called Lesson Space, which I completely love. And Lesson Space enables us to, somebody said it's kind of like Zoom and a whiteboard, a smartboard had a baby, because it allows us to work with kids. And for our older students, this flexibility is key in the sessions and when we're going to have the sessions, but also the method in that we can annotate work together. We can co-browse sites together. We can see when the student is paying attention and when the student isn't. But Lesson Space is a platform just for educators. It's different than anything else. And that's what we use for our students in math. Um, and you can find out more about our services at ectutoring.com. And there's a drop down for under subject tutoring for math. Well, thank you so much for shedding light on this such an important topic. It is something that plagues kids more than any other subject. So thank you for
Absolutely. It
teaching
is
us.
it's easily the most requested subject of all of the school subjects. So that tells you something right there.
Yeah, you're right. It is the most requested subject we get at EC Tutoring, that's for sure. Well, thanks again, Pete, for being my guest today. It was a
Thank
pleasure
you.
having you. I hope this was helpful to all the parents out there. And I hope to see you at our next webinar. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.